Alright, in this video I'm going to be framing a walk-in closet in my basement. It's going to go roughly where that gray patch is from where the previous owners had blue painted on the floor, and it's going to go right on the back side of this utility room that's already there and already exists. And the width of this thing is going to be just over 5 feet. Obviously it's just going to be the width of the utility room, and the length of it is going to be 8 feet. I could probably go a little shorter, but I think it just makes sense to end there because of the way the rest of the walls are going to work. So it is a fairly large walk-in closet, and it's going to end right underneath a floor joist. I think it's easier to just run it under a floor joist than have it like in between two floor joists. I'll have to do a few other things like move this light switch that used to be attached to a wall a few years ago, and I will fix that later, but for now I'm just going to do the framing of the walk-in closet. So normally when I'm framing in the basement, I usually do a double top plate. So one treated board on the bottom and then two non-treated boards on the top. And because this is 8 feet, I'm going to use 7 8-foot 2x4s. And big shout out to Home Depot for having the straightest 2x4s I've ever seen at a Home Depot. And the first thing I'm going to do is mark 16 on center. I don't really need to do it on the second top plate, but I do need to do it on the bottom plate and the first top plate. So just take the measuring tape, mark where it says 16 inches, and then take some sort of a straight edge and just draw a line across all three boards, and then you know you could do them all at once, and that's 16 on center across everything. And then when you go put in the studs, it's easy to line everything up. So that first one was really just for demonstration. Normally I just put the tape measure down and do 16 on center all the way down all the boards, and then come by with a square, or like I said, some sort of a straight edge, and just line it up so that everything is in fact 16 on center. And then you have that line going across the top and bottom plate. And the next thing I'm going to do is just put the bottom plate with the two top plates in the rough position that they're going to sit, and I'm going to just measure how high the wall is. In this case, it's going to be about 81¼ inches from the floor to ceiling, and obviously I just leave the top and bottom plate there. And I do that so I don't have to subtract the width of the top and bottom plate when I actually go and cut the studs for the wall. And I just go down and measure from the floor to the joist for all the joists. Sometimes I find one of the joists might hang low, or the floor may drop slightly. So every once in a while you might get a strange measurement, but in this case everything is 81¼ and then I just take the first board I cut and make sure that it's good. I don't really need to do this. It's kind of confirmed that it's good, but I like to make sure everything's good to go. Obviously I'm not on a schedule. I'm not doing this for speed or to get paid by somebody else. So I definitely take a measure twice, cut once approach to everything, so I could save money instead of saving time. And there are all the boards pre-cut. Now I use a combination of screws and nails, which is probably strange. If you have a nail gun, I would just use that, but I do not have a real nail gun that's good for framing. I use construction screws, and then if you have a treated bottom plate, it is best to use nails and screws that are for treated lumber. So I got these ones, which are the galvanized hot dip, and then I have just some regular Ardoc spiral nails, and those are both 3.5 inches in length. So now it's time to put the wall together. And like I said, now I'm going to use the lines I drew on the tops and bottom plates, so it's nice and easy to line them up, and then everything is going to be 16 on center. And as mentioned, I have 7 studs, and that's pretty much what you need if you do an 8-foot wall. It works out very well. And the reason I use screws, or usually drop one screw into every board, is just so everything holds together nicely. The thing about screws is the shear strength is a lot lower on them, whereas the nail has a very high shear strength. Basically, if you hit the screw back and forth a couple of times, it will end up breaking the screw for these ones. They're not actually designed to have a high shear strength. And like I said, I usually just use a screw that you can use for treated wood at the bottom, and then I'm going to come around and use the nails. So I use the screws to keep everything tight, and then use the nails. It's an oddity that I do perhaps, but I find that it makes for a very tight wall and a very strong wall. Like I said, if I had a nail gun, I would probably just use nails, but I find this is a decent way to do it. And then I do the exact same thing on the bottom plate. Obviously this time I'm using a nail that is rated for treated wood so that it doesn't corrode. I don't really think it's a big deal. I think it's more of a big deal if the wood's getting wet and dry and the chemicals are sort of leaching into the nail, but I use it anyway in the basement. Obviously, if your basement gets super wet, you've got bigger problems to worry about than a non-load bearing wall. And then I take some of the construction screws and just drop a couple of them into the top plate so that I could double up the top plate. And certainly you don't have to go for a double top plate if it's a non-load bearing wall. If all you're hanging is drywall on it, it's not really that big of a deal, but I like to do it anyway. I find, again, it's just a stronger wall in general. And then really just slide the wall into place, and it's definitely beneficial if you have a hammer, and just a small hammer usually doesn't cut it. Something like a sledgehammer is the way to go. So if you got a 5 or 10 pound sledgehammer, very useful for tapping it into place, and that would be the case whether you're in the basement or you're on the second floor of your house. Then I use the tape measure and just make sure everything's equal distance from the opposite walls. Try and make sure everything looks square. Take the level, make sure the wall is plumb vertically and looking good. And just like everything for the pressure treated wood, I'm going to use pressure treated nails, and I'm going to use this Ramset nail gun. I generally use the hottest load nail you can use because I find sometimes with the old concrete it doesn't really make it all the way through. So every once in a while you'll get one that doesn't go all the way in, which is a bit of a pain, and then you got to take the sledgehammer. I always use a sledgehammer instead of a regular hammer. I find the regular hammer sort of causes the concrete to spall, whereas the sledgehammer punches it in sort of in one motion, nice and quick. And just because I already have a wall in place, I'm going to secure the new wall to the old wall, and then I'm going to go to the end of this thing, make sure it's plumb in all directions, and then to fix the top plates to the floor joist, I'm going to use these GRK fasteners. Now these have a lot higher shear strength than those construction screws. And ultimately I use 2 of them into most of the floor joists. I don't do all of them. I think that that's overkill. Again, this has to hold up 2 pieces of drywall on either side, and then obviously it's a walk-in closet, so it'll have to hold up some clothes, but that's not that big of a deal. I do come around and put in fire blocking. Normally you probably wouldn't need fire blocking in the basement like this. It would be more to separate floors, but I also find that the fire blocking makes for a much more rigid wall, so I always take my scrap pieces and make that fire blocking. I've already cut out the double top plate to the width needed, and then for the bottom, obviously it has to be smaller because this wall also has the door on it. So I've got an 8-inch board, and that's the side that's going to go to the hinge, and then I have a larger board to take up the rest of the space. And the door is going to be a 32-inch door, so I've got a 34-inch rough opening. So 32-inch door is going to have 34-inch rough opening. And really I just put everything together in the same way. I do have to go around that one wire that is protected by metal. So I'm going to mark that out on the top plate that's going to go obviously against that wire. And I obviously need to make a notch for that, and then I can put the ceiling on later. So for notching it, I just take a circular saw. Obviously don't cut all the way through the wood, so you have to have it set, in this case, to about 1 inch. And I'm just going to use the circular saw to make a whole bunch of strips on the 2x4. And once I've made a sufficient number of cuts on the 2x4, just take a hammer and smack those, and they should all break out at all about the same level. So pretty easy to make that notch. And obviously this is just rough carpentry. So I've already framed this. I'm doing a double 2x4 all the way around for where the door goes, and then everything else is just a single 2x4. So the end of the wall, that's it. And obviously where the hinge is going to go is on this smaller side. And again, it's got a double 2x4. And you may also notice that I have no header or cripple studs, anything like that for the door. And the reason for that is the door is pretty much going to go all the way up to the top plate. So I don't think I'm going to have any room for the additional header once the floor goes down, and that's why I'm not worrying about it. So at the top, the door is just going to get fixed to the double top plate. And I'm going to slide this one in place just like the other one. Again, helpful to have a sledgehammer, not necessarily required. So no big secret, I used construction screws to fix the 2 walls to each other. I shot some nails through the concrete to hold the floor down. I've used the GRK fasteners across the top, and then I used this clamp to push the door apart so it stays 34 inches all the way around, and then shot a nail through the floor there. So that's how I framed up this walk-in closet. Didn't take too long, maybe 2 hours per wall. Obviously, I work slowly, and then eventually we'll get the rest of the closet built down here, and maybe one day we'll get a bedroom down here, but I'm gonna have to get a window put in before I can actually have a legal bedroom in my basement. So the first part of this is get it framed out, and obviously I started on the walk-in closet. Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.